assure you that what you will observe is a vast wasteland.
To try and channel it for
You will see a
good.
procession of
deny what they think is false argument. Free and uncorrupted communication.
First speaker is David Courtwright. He's a research fellow at the Joan B. Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame and president of the Fourth Freedom Forum in Goshen, Indiana. David has a long history of activism and scholarship for peace. In 1978, he was named the executive director of SANE, the Committee for Sane Nuclear Policy, and he initiated the merger of SANE and the Nuclear Weapons Freeze campaign, and for a time served as co-director of the merged organization. More recently, in 2002, David helped to found Win Without War, a coalition of national constituency organizations urging the use of peaceful diplomatic means to assure Iraq's disarmament. David is the author or editor of 13 books, and there's more that could be said, but read the bio in your binder. David.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you to David Krieger and APF for inviting me and Karen to come out here and be with you this weekend. It's difficult at a meeting like this to really have a sense of hope and optimism, I think, when we are given so many tremendously informative presentations about the depth of the absurdity of our government's policies and the enormity of the threats that we face. It's sometimes easy to just sort of give up and turn away and to try to focus on other more hopeful things in life. But it's my role often in these kind of meetings, and it's really been my whole life's work, to try to emphasize the positive and to talk about the powers that we really do have as citizens to make a difference, and how we have made a difference in history, and it is possible to do so again now, and indeed it's absolutely necessary. We need to reflect upon our own history. It was commented on a couple of times by our speakers about how the enormous nuclear threat that we faced in the 80s, when we really felt that the all-out nuclear holocaust was palpably close, when U.S. and Soviet Union were on the nuclear edge, and we were all engaged in the nuclear freeze campaign, driven by the fear that the whole world would be wiped out at any moment. That fear, thankfully, has passed to a substantial degree. And why did it pass? In large part because of the effort that many of you participated in. It wasn't because of peace through strength, and Reagan and Bush the first claimed credit, but it really was because of the enormous citizen movements in this country, the nuclear freeze campaign, the disarmament movements in Europe, and of course mostly due to the visionary leadership of Gorbachev in the Soviet Union. History changed in part because so many of us went out and made a difference in the streets. And through enormous campaigns, through tremendous organizing efforts, we stopped nuclear testing, we stopped the MX missile system, we stopped the supposed crisis relocation program, the civil defense program of the Bush administration, and we helped to create a political climate that made it necessary and possible for the Reagan administration to move towards arms reduction. That was our success, and we helped to make it possible. We've had similar successes before. I began my own political involvement during the Vietnam days. A couple of our speakers, Dan and others, have mentioned that they have a military career. Well, I do too, in a way. I was a soldier. I was drafted in '68, and I was in the middle of the Vietnam conflict. But I realized that this war was wrong even while I was inside the military, and rather than become a conscientious objector, I became part of the GI peace movement. David Krieger knows about that. He went through a kind of a similar experience, and many of us who are active duty soldiers spoke out for peace and organized anti-war demonstrations on military bases, petitions, underground newspapers. And we helped through that process, as many others did around this country and around the world, to try to bring an end to the earlier illegal, unjust U.S. war. So we have power as citizens, and we can make a change. The challenge we face today in particular is how to reawaken public consciousness of the nuclear danger. And we have to do it from the context of citizen action. We've talked a lot about government policy, but really we know that Washington will do the good and right thing, but only after exhausting all the other alternatives. And that Washington is usually the last place that changes. Unfortunately, there are not enough enlightened and gifted civil servants like Ambassador Graham and others. Too often Washington is in the grip of the powerful vested interests that are only out for their own self-glorification. And it takes citizen effort to put pressure on Washington. The change has to come from the bottom up. And like Howard Zinn, I'm very much a student of history from the bottom up, and both in terms of writing about it and in trying to be a participant in that movement, as many of you have been. So let me focus a bit now on the challenge that we face now and some ideas that have developed over the last year or so that I've been involved in, and there are others that our panel will share with us, and we heard already from the earlier panel about action that we can take. When I think about the nuclear danger today, I'm chastened by the public opinion poll data, which is both optimistic and pessimistic from our point of view. The good news is that if you ask in public opinion polls, do you support a world without nuclear weapons? Would the world be better off without nuclear weapons? Should all governments get rid of nuclear weapons? We find that 60, 70, maybe even 80% of the public says yes. So the public agrees with us. This is in the US. People agree that the world should be without nuclear weapons, that our government should join with others to get rid of these weapons. So in a sense, we are the majority. We already have public support for our goal. On the other hand, if you ask people, is it possible to eliminate nuclear weapons? The responses are in single digits sometimes. There's just not a sense that this is really viable, that it can be achieved. They'd like to see it, the public agrees with us, but they don't see how it can happen. So we have a plausibility barrier. We have to get over the widespread, almost universal sense, outside of this room and some of the other places that we sometimes are engaged in, the sense that we really can't do it. It's too much. It's beyond our capacity as citizens. And so we simply withdraw. We can't deal with it. We can't fight City Hall. We can't fight nuclear City Hall. So I think it's the challenge then is to figure out how we move towards that plausibility factor. The other challenge we face is to think about what is on the public mind. And I think we've learned a great deal over the years, as many of us have been working in activism, about the importance of message framing, of communication strategies, and of understanding the public mentality, the public mood, and trying to find ways in which we can intersect with the thinking that exists now, and to try to bring our ideas into the public mind, into the conventional framing that is currently out there in the public. George Lakoff and many others have told us about the importance of having a frame and a message that resonates with public thinking and that allows us to take people from where they are now and move them literally over in our direction. That's why we have this word, movement. We want to create movement in the sense of building large numbers of people in action and in helping people develop their consciousness and go from here to there to the better future that we know we have to create. So to put those two basic challenges in context, I want to suggest two creative ideas, two strategy ideas that have been evolving recently, and think about how we can move together on them. We can talk about them after the presentation here, and especially tomorrow when we have more of a workshop context in thinking about these. The first, you've already heard from Wade Huntley, this concept of roadmaps. And indeed, Wade's the one who really initiated this concept for me and for others to think about. At a minimum, we should demand that the U.S. government work with other governments to have a plan for how we work towards zero nuclear weapons. And that if we could really put together a campaign which focused on that demand, rather than, we want to have absolute disarmament tomorrow, we have the plausibility barrier. If we say, at a minimum, we ought to at least have a plan. And we ought to demand that our government put together that plan in cooperation with others, as Wade outlined earlier. And indeed, that we as citizens, we have some of our own ideas. We have our model treaty that Western States Legal Foundation and Lawyers Committee has put together. There was, of course, the Canberra Commission. Many other ideas have been developed already for how to get rid of nuclear weapons. What we need to do is get the conversation going and begin to put it out into the public that getting towards nuclear weapons is a necessary goal for our country and the world, and that we'll never get there until we start the process. And let's get the conversation going. Let's have a plan. And ultimately, I'd like to see an initiative where we could have a resolution that would be out there, maybe similar to what we had with the nuclear freeze campaign in the 80s, where civil society organizations, professional groups, religious bodies, and others, and I'll say more about this in a second, could bring forth resolutions and adopt them in their professional capacities and their various conventions and their deliberative bodies, in which they would pass a resolution that says that it should be the responsibility of the United States government to develop a plan for how we systematically reduce and eliminate nuclear weapons. And that should be done in conjunction with other nuclear weapon states. To build this kind of a campaign, I think, might be a way for us to get at the plausibility barrier, to overcome it, and to begin to re-engage society in this essential debate about how we get rid of nuclear weapons. The other challenge has to do with the current public perception about the real threats we face today. And for better or worse, the primary way in which the public thinks about the nuclear weapons issue is in the context of the threat of terrorism. The so-called deadly nexus, the fear that Americans have of terrorism and of nuclear proliferation, and the dread that these two threats may come together. It's a very widespread perception. Public opinion poll has shown that this really does have salience. The general issue of nukes, not very high on the public consciousness scale, but on the question of terrorism and the threat that terrorists might get the bomb, that's very high. So we need to take advantage of that. And one of the ways that is starting to evolve is to try to build a campaign around the concept of nuclear lockdown. To take this phrase, lockdown, and see if this might be the frame, if we use George Lakoff's terms, a frame that we can begin to present to the American people that takes them where they are now and hopefully can move them to the kind of broader vision that we would have about how to get rid of nuclear weapons. Now, right now, there is a broad understanding and broad acceptance in the public of the idea of lockdown. The Nuclear Threat Initiative has done some systematic polling on this. They've done some focus group research, and they found that this idea resonates very well with the public. It's a strong term. It suggests the kind of action that's actually necessary to reduce the nuclear danger, kind of put it under lock and key, get rid of it. Now, in the public mind right now, I'd mostly think it's reference to weapons over there, out there. It's not our own. It's, loose nukes in the former Soviet Union. It's terrorists acquiring these weapons. But it's also a kind of an empty vessel. It's a concept that maybe we can add to. And one of the initiatives that we're putting together now with Fourth Freedom Forum and other groups is to try to develop a short, user-friendly, easily understood concept of what nuclear lockdown means. And it begins with, yes, let's lock down all of those loose nukes in the former Soviet Union. Let's clean out all the global nuclear reactors. But let's also end all fissile material production. Let's stop the production of all nuclear weapons. To add the elements that we've talked about here today as part of the definition of what we mean by nuclear lockdown. And it seems to me that there might be then two parallel tracks for the strategy that we can employ, a strategy that is designed to reach out to the mass public in a non-sectarian, non-political way. I come from a Republican state. Most of my board members are Republicans. I speak mostly to Rotaries and Republican business clubs. And I find that this message can resonate and can be accepted if it's framed in the right way. That we have nuclear danger, we have to move it on it in two ways. Nuclear lockdown, the immediate danger, has to be addressed. We have to do everything we can to greatly expand the U.S. effort to prevent any spread of nuclear weapons and to prevent any development of additional fissile material in new nuclear weapons. But at the same time, as we've heard so often here today, the danger that faces us immediately on proliferation and terrorism cannot be resolved without also addressing the global problem. We have to have the nuclear zero option on the table, and we have to address it and find a way to reach that zero option. And I think that combination of lockdown and the plan for the nuclear zero option is the potential strategy that I would like to propose that we could move forward. One last word, how to do this. We've developed this new project within the religious community. Robert McNamara and others have urged this for some time. I was called by Reverend William Sloane Coffin recently and asked if I would help put together a project to reawaken the religious community. And so we have just created the National Religious Partnership on the Nuclear Weapons Danger and a Faithful Security network, computer list, internet-based network that will work together with many of us and other organizations to try to build this strategy of lockdown and planning for a zero option. Karen Jacobs is here with us, and she's working with the National Religious Partnership, and will tell us more about it tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Our next speaker is my friend Greg Mello, who is both a wonk and an activist. Greg co-founded the Los Alamos Study Group and has served as its director since 1992. During this time, he has conducted in-depth research into a variety of disarmament-related subjects. He's led half a dozen lawsuits against the U.S. Department of Energy and the Los Alamos National Lab, and has organized citizen campaigns on nuclear weapons issues. In 2002, Greg was a visiting research fellow at Princeton University's Program on Science and Global Security. His analysis and the analysis of the study group has been widely circulated to Congress, the executive branch, domestic and foreign news media, and other non-governmental organizations. And just FYI, prior to his work in disarmament, Greg was employed as an environmental engineer in both government and industry. Greg.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, David, and the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation for bringing us all together here. I think it's a very valuable meeting, and it's been very inspiring for me. I guess I'm more optimistic and more pessimistic than many in some ways. I think nuclear disarmament is possible, except that I think we have to get out of the sphere of policy. We have to discipline ourselves to think a little bit less in policy terms and a little bit more in personal terms. I don't mean the personal of personalism, but I mean the personal of personal responsibility, of enactment, of presentational as well as discursive truth. It's only in this way that we're going to reach the public. Working in the communities, as Trish and I do, I want to report to you that it feels as if there is a growing kind of abscission layer between, you might say, the policy community and the actual folks on the street. The problem of salience that David has brought out in the polls speaks to this, but I think it goes quite a bit farther than that. It's not just about what issue is salient with the public, but it's actually about what institutions are still surviving in civil society, about profound pressures that are on households in America today, about the potential for organizing in our communities or the lack thereof, and the changes that have taken place just in the last 10 or 15 years. The study group began in the very early 1990s, and we live in quite a different country today than in the early 90s. Policy, you could say, is overrated. Okay, the first thing I'd like to say is that it's vitally important, I think, to be very clear about what we want in this field, which is also what we stand for, and since we work quite hard at this, who we are. It's who we are. And that's what we principally communicate to other people. The abstract policy discourse doesn't really grab people's attention. It becomes a highly professionalized discourse which remains in the highly professionalized community. I want to say that I think that we have to use political means that state the end that we desire in a very precise way, and to that degree embody and contain the end, maybe even to a greater degree than that. I think if we don't do that, we'll experience failure. And I think that we've seen a lot of failures since the end of the Cold War. We've seen the failure of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty ratification, which I think was almost a foregone conclusion after the arms control community implicitly and explicitly endorsed the Stockpile Stewardship program from about 1995 onwards, a program which lacked technical justification, which roughly doubled the size of the weapons programs at the nuclear laboratories, extended and increased the power of the weapons complex as a whole. The goals of the program included a complete suite of new untested weapons, and it extended the legitimacy of the weapons themselves through the critical post-Cold War period when they were most threatened. And I would say that's really quite important, that the key point is the legitimacy of the weapons themselves. And I couldn't agree more with the general thrust of Doug Roach's comments. It is, which we'll come to in a minute. We have, basically, I think that much of the debates about nuclear weapons policy are, in effect, surrogate debates about the legitimacy of nuclear weapons as a whole and about the morality which we shall have at the heart of our politics. It's that morality which communicates most broadly to other people. And I would say that the successes, such as they have been in the arms control community, have occurred because that basic distaste, the basic illegitimacy of nuclear weapons has been communicated through political windows that have occurred at a given time, rather than any particular narrow technical debate that was one independent of an overall condemnation, an overall distaste and revulsion that people have in their core against nuclear weapons. And in fact, I think that the nuclear weapons debate itself is a symbolic debate about, as Mary Read McGuire said, about the human family and whether we are going to orient ourselves toward life or orient ourselves toward death. I think people in the mass are reached at a very simple core level, the kind of level that we ourselves are at when we're very tired, when we are when we don't have the energy to engage in the intellectual nuances of our field. That's where most of our public is most of the time. And it's at that basic level of grandmother values, of basic morality, that we are going to reach people. And I think it's only by twinning our issue with other key human security and human dignity issues and making it part of a broader platform of human justice that we're ever going to get anywhere in this field. I guess I'll skip over I don't think we've had that many victories. And many of you are aware that we now have, I guess I'll just mention, we have a program now underway which is designed to replace all the weapons in the U.S. stockpile with new design weapons. We are planning on producing them starting in 2010, a few miles from our house. The effort to defeat the robust nuclear earth penetrator, which was a very important effort, and modestly successful, I think was primarily symbolic. And I expect that the reliable replacement warhead will include they'll be rugged, they'll be robust, and as Everett Beckner said to Ian Hoffman at the Oakland Tribune, it would, laughing, when asked, would the new weapons be Earth penetrators, he said, Everett Beckner is the number 2 man, until recently the number 2 man in the weapons complex. Beckner said, well, that is not the primary objective, but it sure would be kind of a nice, laughing, he said, it could be a secondary thing that just happens. Let's see. I think that one of the reasons, let's see here, if we, I think we'll skip that whole page. This paper is in these binders. I want to say that moral discourse, to continue this theme a little bit, is the only way to communicate and coordinate efforts across large numbers of people, organizations, and issues, and finally across time and history itself. And for that reason, it's the only way to accumulate any significant amount of political power. If you think about it, conscience, conscience, is what we know together as human beings. It's what makes us human, and it makes us human together. So when the Einstein-Russell Manifesto calls us to remember our humanity and forget the rest, it's to our common human conscience that we are called. And I think all expertise and clever strategies are really as straws in comparison to that. Now, there's an idea current in a lot of places that, especially in some foundation circles, that we can coordinate a lot of nonprofits together to take action toward a vision of nuclear disarmament by means of some kind of managerial legerdemain, or and I think that what's going to result from this, and what is resulting, is a half-hearted, lowest common denominator approach to complex problems that will remain inherently weak intellectually, morally, and politically. I think that the only way to coordinate a large number of people, diverse people in diverse organizations, is not through managerial technique. How modern, you know? How Taylorist, and if you're a sociologist, but through a common moral understanding. There's no way that you can make up for that common moral understanding with professional facilitation, lots of meetings and conference calls. We're not going to get there to our goal by that. Let's see. Very quickly, I think we need to realize that nuclear weapons policies are not all they're cracked up to be. The U.S. Congress does not make policy in a fully conscious way about nuclear weapons and is therefore not fully invested in those policies. We have found that it is possible to change nuclear weapons policy on the margins and in important ways by preventing stated policies from being implemented. It turns out they're not that vested in a policy which they are ashamed of to begin with. And why are they ashamed? They're ashamed because of the moral problem. They're ashamed because they can't actually bring themselves to talk for a long period of time in detail about how their policies are hypocritical and how they conflict with their foreign policy objectives in Iraq and Iran. So they don't think at all. They look kind of off to the side and they proceed. We've found it's possible to put speed bumps and impediments in nuclear weapons production that now have extended 15 years. And I think it's possible, as Arundhati Roy says in Ordinary Person's Guide to Empire, no victory is too insignificant. If it has to succeed, it has to begin here in America. We have to isolate empire's working parts and disable them one by one. Now, why does that add up? It adds up because it has a common moral message about human dignity. And you don't have to coordinate all the parts if you've got that common moral message. Let's see. So I guess I'm saying nuclear weapons policy is made in an inchoate manner across society. It's not made in the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. alone. I want to emphasize in this that the nuclear weapons complex has both a material and an immaterial aspect. Every warrior knows that the spiritual aspects of struggle are quite important. Every basketball team, everything. We ourselves often consider ourselves weak because we look at the huge array of power and money arrayed against us. But in fact, for this thing to function, a lot of small pieces have to work very well together, and usually they don't. The Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board recently said that the Los Alamos plutonium facility, where all of these new weapons are supposed to have their key part made, is now functioning at about 5% efficiency. Well, that's great. Could be 1%. Our job is not to provide peer review for better management, better policies. In the case of this, we want to stop this from happening altogether. We want them to be inefficient, and that's not that hard. It's not that hard to help government fail. It turns out that to make the weapons complex work, there's a whole array of immaterial factors having to do with morale, retention, recruitment, tacit knowledge. It's not that easy to run a multi-billion-dollar complex operation and make it work. Citizens working together can keep it from working. The individual actors have to hide from their communities in order to carry on this mission. And those of us who work and have lived near Livermore, we all have this experience. There's a joke in northern New Mexico. No one's ever actually met anyone who works at Los Alamos National Laboratory who works on nuclear weapons. No one will admit it. They're all scientists. Oh, I'm a technician, I'm a laser scientist, I'm this, I'm that. They won't admit it. So I guess I'm going to stop here, but I generally want to say that disinvestment in all its various forms, social disinvestment, moral disinvestment, financial disinvestment, is real disarmament. That attacking the social legitimacy of nuclear weapons across the board is direct disarmament. Policy follows this process. Policy follows public opinion, organized public opinion, that can reach the public domain through newspapers. I guess I'm going to tell you that it's easier to push a news article out of a medium-sized newspaper in New Mexico than it is in the New York Times. It's easier to get it from there, from the Albuquerque Journal into the British papers or the papers around the world than it is to surmount that first hurdle into the New York Times. And that, and perhaps this is a segue to Pamela's talk, I don't know. Policy takes place in locations, in real locations, with real people. Policy is personalized in the actions of individual human actors. Each of us taking responsibility for nuclear disarmament ourselves, not confining ourselves completely to an abstract policy space which is disconnected from the nourishment of the demos and the political power that comes from that, but taking our prestige, taking our knowledge, and sinking it back down into the people. That's where the political power is. That's where the media responds. We have to pull ourselves out of really outer space a lot of the time. I wonder, where is this debate happening? And bring it down to where people live and work, where they go to church, where they vote, where they have real political power. And when we do that, I think we'll find that our work has new wings. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg. It's hard to be the timekeeper when everybody tends to get into their most interesting ruminations right at the end of their time, I notice. But hopefully we'll have a chance to talk tomorrow more. Okay, the next speaker is another good friend, Pamela Meidel. With Alice and myself, we are among the founding mothers of Abolition 2000. Pamela is a writer, and she's the founder and director of the Atomic Mirror, a UN-affiliated nonprofit program dedicated to reflecting the truths of our nuclear era and transforming them through creativity and the arts. She served as the first international coordinator of Abolition 2000, which actually was at that time being housed at the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, and then moved on to the Global Resource Action Center. I have to give everybody credit here. I should say David and Jürgen are founding fathers of Abolition 2000. In 1995, Pamela reported daily from The Hague on the oral hearings phase of the International Court of Justice case on the illegality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons. She's a convener with Dr. Gabino Aguirre, the mayor of Santa Paula, of the Abolition Now Ventura County Initiative. She works with local organizations to engage Ventura County's mayors and cities in creating ways to help local democracy flourish and keep our communities safe and awake to nuclear issues. She has created and produced 4 performing pieces on nuclear themes that have been presented around the world. Pamela.
Thank you, Jackie. Good afternoon, everybody. I don't know about you, but 4 o'clock is about time for tea for me, so I brought my water with me. I've entitled my piece this afternoon, "The Power of Place: Citizens and Local Elected Officials Uniting to Create a Nuclear-Free World," because I was invited by the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to represent them here this afternoon. And I want to thank David for hosting this amazing gathering, and to thank Mayor Akiba and Mayor Ito, who couldn't be here with you or with us, for asking me to represent them and talk about the Mayors for Peace emergency campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. I'm very happy to see many familiar faces and beloved colleagues in the room, and new people. I'm glad some of the students are still here. Thank you for enduring. That's what it takes, perseverance. My organization, the Atomic Mirror, has been working in partnership with the Mayors for Peace initiative as part of the Abolition Now Citizens Campaign for over 2 years now. And these efforts aim to achieve what 35 years of diplomatic negotiations have failed to achieve so far, and that is to ensure that Nagasaki is the last city on Earth to suffer atomic bombardment and lay nuclear weapons to rest forever. Black Elk of the Lakota Nation, which is a site of many uranium mines, says, "We don't have to heal the Earth. We merely need to remove what is making her sick." And I think that's really what it's all about. We're talking about what is making us sick. Nuclear weapons make us sick. I was thinking about this because as I was thinking about my remarks, my friend Natalie Geringer kept coming to mind. She's a pediatrician who works in an emergency ward, emergency room. And the emergency campaign is something that mayors have, really emphasized that we are in a state of global emergency. But my friend Natalie told me that there are 3 questions that are routinely asked when you go into an emergency room. Some of you may know these questions. They are, who are you? Where are you? And when are you? In other words, what time is it? What day is it? If you can answer all these questions, the doctors will consider you what she calls oriented by 3, a basic quick evaluation of mental status. Not, and this is her words, not terribly meaningful, as you can answer these questions and still be completely loony. But if you can't answer them, then we know there's a problem. So I'm going to try and answer them for us today, just by way of orienting us a little bit, because Greg was right. This is a perfect segue. We all live in places, and who are we? I mean, look around at everybody in the room. Look at each other, not at me for a moment, and think about who we are. We are a group of people who are gathered together to think about the nuclear issue. That's pretty rare, as we've learned today in this society. We are men and women, many ages, ordinary human beings, but foremost, we are citizens. We are not consumers, despite the fact that our government tells us we're consumers. We are consumers, but our identity as citizens is very important. Where are we? We are in the central coast of California. I don't know how much David told you about this area, but we are on the edge of what our friends in the Pacific call the liquid continent. We are in the territorial homelands of the Chumash people, which stretches from Monterey Bay to Malibu in the south. This resource-rich area includes the only condors of North America, gray whales on the islands, in the Channel Islands, special breeds of foxes that are only out there. Many low hills, strawberry fields. The Beatles talked about strawberry fields forever. Well, they're in Oxnard, where I live. It's also the place of the Western Gate, a sacred portal through which pass all the souls who die on Turtle Island or North America. And it is the Chumash responsibility to act as the guardians of this gate, which sits within the boundaries of Vandenberg Air Force Base. Which brings me to my point. We are in a nuclear landscape as well. We have Vandenberg Air Force Base to the north. We have Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant to the north. At the base of the Channel Islands, we have shells of depleted uranium, which were tested and used in the Gulf War. We have, in the south, the world's first city completely powered by nuclear energy, the city of Moore Park, which also saw the first core meltdown in 1953, and that was from the Santa Susana Field Laboratory in Simi Valley. One of our esteemed Chumash leaders, Palula Kus, who is an elder in the Bear Clan, when asked about the nuclear sites on her people's land, said, "The remedy is so simple, just stop. Don't add any more to the problem." But more on that later. The third question is, when are we? What time is it? We know it's Friday, February 24th, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but it's springtime here in the northern hemisphere of our planet. As a planet, we've been here for about 4.5 billion years, and as human beings, about 2 million years. We started to use tools about 2 million years ago, and then farming about 10,000 years ago. This is important because 60 years ago, we entered the nuclear age, which is requiring us to think as far in the future as I've just talked about our past. We have to think in terms of geologic time to really begin to comprehend what we have done. This is all kind of by way of context of everything that we've been talking about this afternoon, because the radioactive half-life of plutonium-239 is 24,000 and some years, and of uranium-238, 4.5 billion years. We can honestly say that in the life of our planet, the splitting of the atom has created an emergency, a sudden, unexpected occurrence demanding immediate action. What the mayors have done, and I think that what the mayor's campaign has done is really unique because we had the Abolition Global Network. It was very active for 7 years, and when the mayors came on the scene, they were standing in the nuclear emergency room in the very streets of their own cities and asking us to do the same thing. I first met Mayor Ito on the banks of Crane Harbor in Nagasaki in 1995 at the end of a pilgrimage that several of us in this room participated in. I later saw him in The Hague 3 months later. We had brought healing gifts from across the United States from the communities that had created the plutonium bomb that bombed Nagasaki. And when we presented them to him, he had the grace to receive them. But when he came to The Hague, he brought gifts. He brought the gifts of the testimony of his people and of the photographs of Yosuke Yamahata, who had taken photographs of Nagasaki 3 days after the bombing. And their testimonies at the oral hearings were very, very remarkable. We've heard some of them earlier today, but I just want to read a few sentences. Mayor Hiraoka at that time was the mayor of of Hiroshima, and he said his wife, who was also a first-year student at a girls' school, happened to be sick that day and didn't go to school, so she was saved. Nearly all of her classmates were killed. And even today, the fact that her life was spared remains a heavy burden of grief deep in her heart. Those who survived will never escape the psychological and physical effects of the bombing. Mayor Ito appealed to the judges with the concluding remarks, "The unspeakable atrocity and agony suffered by the citizens of Nagasaki must never be repeated in this world. Therefore, I extend my heartfelt request for your decision based on the viewpoint of human love." He appealed for human love from the judges. The mayors of Nagasaki and Hiroshima compel us because of the power of place. They keep faith with where they live and with who lives there with them. The current mayor of Hiroshima, Mayor Akiba, renewed the call for a world free of nuclear weapons in Geneva in April of 2003, just 1 month after we all witnessed the shock and awe of Baghdad, and after 11 million people had massed in the cities of our planet, appealing to the U.S. not to go to war. He invited all the citizens, institutions, and governments to take action to make real the cry of the Hibakusha, never again. My paper also is not in there, but it will be published with the proceedings that come out of this, so I'm going to skip over some of this. But one of the things that Mayor Akiba did that day was to say that it is our responsibility to launch a massive grassroots campaign, that it will make it clear that people of all nations will only accept leaders who undertake unequivocally to eliminate nuclear weapons. We refuse to cooperate in our own annihilation. When he called for a movement for nuclear abolition, he discovered a global network of 2,000 citizen groups who are already committed and ready to join hands with him. One of the immediate goals was to bring an international delegation of the world's mayors to the next preparatory committee meeting of the NPT, which was in 2004. And they wanted to bring 30 mayors to that meeting. And 2 months before the meeting, I was on a conference call. We do still have to have conference calls, Greg. And I discovered that there were no U.S. mayors on that delegation. They had asked many mayors across the country to participate, and all of them had said no. So I thought, I have to find a mayor in my community. Surely I can find someone. So I asked my friend Carmen Ramirez, and she said, well, let's ask Gabino Aguirre. Santa Paula, California, doesn't even qualify to be part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors because you have to be a city of 30,000 people, and Santa Paula has 29,500 people. But he said yes. And when he appeared at the UN, he found out that he was the only representative, elected official mayor from the United States, part of a delegation that included the mayor of Kiev, the mayor of Sarajevo, the vice mayor of London. It was an amazing delegation, and what happened there was that the mayors met with the non-aligned movement. They went and they took their case to to the diplomats of the United Nations directly. And it was very interesting to see the protocol. The United Nations was full of protocol, but there was some anxiety, I would say, about how do you deal with local elected officials. I mean, there are protocols for all the other kinds of elected officials, but here were local elected officials who were coming, bringing the concerns of all of our hearts to the UN, and they were speaking as the guardians and protectors of the well-being of their local places. After that, Abolition 2000 launched the Abolition Now campaign, and all over the world, this campaign took root thanks to the many groups all over the world who already were working. Matt talked about what was happening in Belgium and in Germany, but a lot of that was the direct result of people making decisions in Germany, for example, 3 groups getting together, convening a local council, holding a meeting of their 22 mayors. In London, they had a meeting where they actually used the resolution that was achieved at the U.S. Conference of Mayors when Mayor Aguirre and Mayor Akiba went there. That became the model that they used in Britain for reaching out to the cities of the British Isles. So there were many ricocheting effects around the world. In the U.S., that resolution was the model for local cities, including Santa Paula, including Santa Fe, New Mexico, and including Olympia, Washington. In an America where national leaders had no ears to hear the will of the people, the mayors reminded us that all politics is local, and helped us to recapture the public interest in nuclear issues at the grassroots level. We in Ventura County turned to our local leaders who did hear us and took action. 2 of our 5 county supervisors signed on, as well as 5 of the 10 mayors in our county. My new partners are not committed abolitionists that I've known for 10 years, many of them whom are in this room. They're a local principal of a school, a local lawyer who's just been elected to the Board of Governors of the California Bar Association, a local poet who regularly does spoken word at the open mic downtown Ventura. The mayors reminded us of the power of particularity. The use of nuclear weapons destroys particular places, incinerates particular people, burns up particular trees, and boils particular rivers. The creation and production of nuclear weapons poisons particular mesas and aquifers, sickens particular people and animals, corrupts particular democratic processes, and shields decision makers from the consequences of their decisions. The people of San Ildefonso Pueblo, New Mexico, Hanford, Washington, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee, know these truths by heart because their lands were carved out by eminent domain to create the Manhattan Project. Shoshone and Paiute people in Nevada and Mormons in Utah and island people of the Marshalls know them because they have seen the mushroom clouds of 1,000 nuclear tests and 66 hydrogen tests over their lands. 60 years into the nuclear age, they are still feeling those downwind effects. We all came surging to the NPT Review Conference from all of our various places under the shadow of the Iraq War, full of hope. And we all know, we've heard the various reactions of what's happened around the world, and we know what obstacles we face because of that. But I just want to say that despite these challenges, I submit to you that a sea change happened in May 2005 in 3 important ways. Number 1, the citizens of the world and their local elected officials turned up in force for the first time. Over 1,700 people stood in line to get into the UN on the opening day, and thousands more marched in Central Park, chanting "No nukes, no wars." There's the poster over there. Number 2, and very, very important, is the Hibakusha took center stage in the General Assembly Hall of the United Nations, and the world listened. Just 10 years earlier, Hibakusha were given no platform at events surrounding the NPT Review and Extension Conference. So this was the stories of the people were given a central place. And number 3, and I want to particularly thank Ambassador Graham for this one, Americans showed up at the end of the last week of the NPT and asked the world for help. The last week of the conference, Ambassador Graham, Ted Sorensen, and Robert McNamara appealed to the assembled countries to be brave and stand up to the United States. And that day, I felt proud to be an American sitting in the halls of the UN, and I thank you for that. That was a very encouraging moment. Which brings us finally to today's topic, which I will conclude with, which are domestic strategies for changing U.S. nuclear policy. And I would like to suggest a slightly revised topic when I offer this strategy, which is American strategies for creating a nuclear-free world. By America, I mean all of the Americas. I mean North America, I mean Central America, and I mean South America. Because on February 14th, Valentine's Day, 1967, the countries of the Caribbean and Latin America gave us the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which is international law. This is about international law. We have not abandoned the Treaty of Tlatelolco. In fact, in the last 10 years, 2 more treaty zones, nuclear-free zones, have been created, so that now we have almost the entire southern hemisphere of our world is a nuclear weapon-free zone. This was in direct response to the belligerent and fearful experience of the Cuban Missile Crisis and demonstrated that the countries nearest the biggest nuclear power could still take effective and imaginative action. Something that was little noted at the NPT Review Conference was the meeting that took place a week before in Mexico City of the nuclear weapon-free zone countries of the world. 110 countries gathered together for the very first time to talk to each other about what they could do without the nuclear weapon states being there as participants. They were there, but they could not speak. This was really unprecedented. And the other thing was that new NGOs were there also at the table as equal partners. That meeting, I got it. At that meeting, they agreed to meet every 5 years. They are now going to meet before the NPT Review Conference in 2010 in the Pacific, hosted by the Pacific countries of the Treaty of Rarotonga. In 2015, they're going to be meeting in Bangkok, and in 2020, they'll be meeting in South Africa. I think that this gives us an enormous opportunity to seize this parallel process that we've all been looking for. Because in addition to that, every 2 years, the agency that oversees the Treaty of Tlatelolco, OPNAL, has a meeting in November. And every 2 years, they invite NGOs to come and participate and sit down at the table with them. So this year, last year in November, the Atomic Mirror showed up, and representing Mayor for Peace, Gabino Aguirre, showed up. And there were only 4 NGOs on the program. And there were only 9 NGOs who were there. And we are there sitting with governments. This is the forum, like the landmines, that we've been looking for. This is our opportunity. Regional nuclear weapon-free zones are a significant and powerful strategy for achieving a world free of nuclear weapons. We should endeavor to link these zones for the express purpose of isolating the nuclear weapon states into a planetary corner where the only option will be to abdicate before the collective voices of the other superpower, our organized communities, and give in to a commitment to total and unequivocal disarmament. Regional nuclear weapon-free zones form the heart of the untold success story of the road to a nuclear weapons-free world, and one of our best hopes for bringing it into being. We can do this. We can do this. After all, it was a country in this region, Costa Rica, which introduced the Model Nuclear Weapons Convention into the UN. As Mayor Aguirre said in Santiago, Chile, the work of this OPNAL organization is very important parallel effort in the popular struggle for freedom from nuclear annihilation. The countries of the Americas are the natural allies of nuclear abolitionists in the United States. They recognized early on that we are all on the nuclear precipice, and they took steps to use international law to protect their communities and their regions. In doing so, they inspired others across the globe to do the same. Just this week, Malaysia proposed the creation of a nuclear weapons-free zone in Northwest Asia at the International Islamic Conference in Qatar. But this does not get reported in our media. We know we are in the majority as nuclear abolitionists. And I would like to abide by my timekeeper, who has been very generous to me, and say that we need to practice dialogue, democracy, and diplomacy. We are all ambassadors wherever we go, and we need to act on our citizenship. Terry Tempest Williams, who is a Mormon downwinder from Utah, recently spoke, and she quoted a local activist and community organizer in Philly. And I just want to say these are the parameters for local organizing. Sense a need, have a vision, anchor with a local leader, present the vision to more leaders, involve more leaders, create beauty and share it, create a structure from the ground up, identify the storytellers and set them loose, train leaders, involve elders, engage the children, be willing to change every day, await magic, anticipate transformation, remember to check our egos at the door of the community. We dare to dream of a world without nuclear arms. Can we do it? As the leader of the farm workers in California and a local Oxnard homeboy, Cesar Chavez says, yes, it can be done. Come, let's get to work. Si se puede.
Thank you, Pamela. And like many of the speakers, Pamela had to cut down, and Greg had to cut down their written remarks, and other speakers on other panels. So I really hope that your appetites have been whetted and that you will take the time to read the full written reports, because there's really a lot of very important detail that we weren't able to get into here. And Michael Intriligator, our final panelist, is one of the people who has prepared a very long written talk. And he has a very dense bio, and I don't know how to shorten this, but let me just try. He's a professor of economics at the University of California, Los Angeles, where he is also professor of political science, professor of public policy in the School of Public Affairs, and co-director of the Jacob Marshak Interdisciplinary Colloquium on Mathematics in the Behavioral Sciences. That is a mouthful. In addition, that's not enough, but there's more. He is a senior fellow of the Milken Institute in Santa Monica and the Gorbachev Foundation of North America in Boston. But wait, there's more. He's been a member of the UCLA faculty since 1963, teaching courses in economic theory, econometrics, mathematical economics, international relations, and health economics. And he has received several distinguished teaching awards. He is the author of more than 200 journals and articles and other publications in the areas of economic theory and mathematical economics, econometrics, health economics, reform of the Russian economy, and strategy and arms control. And I'm not going to tell you the names of his books. You can read them in the binder, but I think we have some kind of a Renaissance man here. So let's welcome Professor Intrillagator.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking David and Dave for invitation to participate and speak here at this conference. And I thank all of you for staying to the very end. That's great persistence. I want to start out by making some comments about the title of the overall symposium and the title of this session in the symposium. The title of the overall symposium is At the Nuclear Precipice, and I very much agree with that title. And I think we're getting closer to the brink, and I think we have to focus on what's happened in the last years, particularly since the advent of the 21st century. Two developments that have pushed us closer to the brink. One I alluded to before when I gave a comment in the morning session on nuclear terrorism. The fact that terrorists could acquire nuclear weapons is a subject of a recent paper of mine that's coming out as a chapter in a book I've edited this coming fall. That, I think, is one very serious threat and danger, which is a new one, which we didn't really have 8-10 years ago. The other thing that I think is a serious threat is the nuclear weapons policy of the Bush administration. And many people are not aware of how our policy has changed with the advent of this current administration. And I think that's a very serious danger that has to be recognized and dealt with. And I also want to talk about the title of this particular session on domestic policies to change that. And I think we have to focus on specifics there as well. But let me start by talking about the fact that there have been remarkable changes in recent years in U.S. nuclear weapons policy under the administration of President George W. Bush, announced in 2002 in 3 official documents that constitute a new doctrine, the Bush Doctrine, ending the security system and nuclear weapons policy of the Cold War period. We're in a new era, basically. The old problems, the old issues, the old questions, the old policies have all changed. And it creates a huge danger for us and for the world as a whole. And people are not aware of it. And I think it has to be discussed and evaluated. As I say in my paper, they represent a discontinuous sea change in the international security system that calls for discussion, debate, and analysis, none of which have occurred. So what I want to do is present some of those concepts, which I'll have to do in a telegraphic way. It's a long paper, as you said. If you're interested, you can read the whole paper. And I want to talk about how this could change over time, what we could do about it. And I think we have to really put our efforts in that direction of changing. And there is some indication that there is some new thinking taking place. And I'll come to that at the end. It was in an article in the Financial Times of January 6th, a month ago. Front page article, U.S. to revise national security stance. Surprisingly, this did not come out in the New York Times or the LA Times or other newspapers. I only saw it in the Financial Times. Remarkable, but it was a front page article there. Let me start by giving some background to this new Bush policy. What's the background to these new nuclear weapons doctrines? There's some elements of it in previous initiatives, policies that have been taken under President Clinton and earlier presidents, but the background to this new nuclear weapons policy or doctrine is the end of the Cold War in 1989, the dissolution of the Soviet Union on Christmas Day in 1991, The Project for a New American Century, many people are not aware of this, PNAC as it's called, which you can check on their website, but the PNAC was established in 1997 to, quote, promote American global leadership. This is before the Bush administration came to power, during the Clinton administration. And it's still active, and most of the people who are involved in PNAC are people who are currently in major leadership positions in this current administration. That includes Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Pearl, Armitage, Bolton, Khalilzad, Libby, Zakheim, Zellick, and others. It's an amazing list of people. Virtually everybody except the president himself was part of that group, now called neoconservatives. Another background is this 9/11, the terrorist attacks in this country, and the ensuing declaration of the Bush administration of a war on terrorism, later broadened to a global war on terrorism. Let me just, as an aside, say that some of you may be familiar with the famous essay by Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, called Perpetual Peace, that came out in the 1700s. And modern scholars have built on that to talk about democratic peace. Even the president has alluded to that in some of his speeches about how democracies don't fight with each other, which is not quite true. But I want to say about his global war on terrorism, GWOT as it's sometimes referred to, G-W-O-T, this is not Immanuel Kant's perpetual peace. This is George Bush's perpetual war, a war without end. When you have a war on a tactic, which is terrorism, which has been around forever, that war will never end. So this is perpetual war. Now, what are these changes that were announced in 2002? 3 documents came out that year. One is the Nuclear Posture Review, delivered in January 2002, leaked by the LA Times. It was a classified document, but most of it has come out. Secondly, was the National Security Strategy of the United States of America, Condi Rice, then the National Security Advisor. Her document that came out in September 2002, unclassified, on the open, as an open public document. It's on the White House website if you're interested in seeing it. It's a remarkable document. If you're interested in this subject, you have to read that document. The National Security Strategy of the United States of America. This is our basic document on our national security strategy, and it's a total change from our previous policies. Third of these documents is the National Strategy to Combat Weapons of Mass Destruction. That came out in December 2002. So these documents all came out in 2002. Partly their response to the September 11th attacks. Some of this was thought up earlier by the Project for the New American Century, these guys who are now in power, particularly the cabal, as it was referred to by Colin Powell's deputy, the cabal of Cheney and Rumsfeld. Those 2 guys who were 2 of the principals in the PNAC, the Project for the New American Century, push these policies, and so they go back to that. So let me say a little bit about each of these. What did they do? First of all, they announced targets for our nuclear weapons. The NPR, the Nuclear Posture Review, announced a set of countries that are on our nuclear hit list, countries that we are planning to target with nuclear weapons. Remarkable. 7 nations are named as targets of U.S. nuclear weapons. 2 are, you might call them, old enemies, namely Russia and China. 2 of the 3 countries listed as members of the Axis of Evil, one of which doesn't exist anymore, in President Bush's 2002 State of the Union speech, which is Iran, Iraq, which doesn't exist anymore in that form, and North Korea. 3rd are 2 countries listed by the U.S. as terrorist states, Syria and Libya. Of these 7 nations, 3 are non-nuclear weapon states that are parties to the treaty, the NPT. And we had made a commitment not to target those nations, but now we've stated that they are targets. We've gone back on our word, in other words. We have a new triad as part of this new doctrine, new Bush doctrine. You remember the old triad of 3 types of basing modes for weapons, nuclear weapons in particular. But now there's a new triad. Again, most people are not aware of this. There's been no debate, no analysis, no discussion, no op-eds, no articles and so forth that discuss these things. It's quite remarkable when there's such a discontinuous change on a subject of such great importance and interest that there's no discussion, there's no analysis. You'd expect that people would be analyzing these things, but they don't. Anyway, there's a new triad. The first part is the old triad. All 3 elements of the old triad are the one part of the new triad, which is offensive weapons in these 3 basing modes that we had earlier. The second is defenses, with this missile defense system that's under development in Alaska and California. And the third is a revitalized defense infrastructure. Those are the 3 elements of the new triad. Preemption is an important part of these documents. The National Security Strategy of the United States places emphasis on preemption. Some people have pointed out properly that the more accurate description is a preventive war, whatever you call it, that we can actually take the initiative and strike before someone strikes us, which of course we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course there are significant dangers involved with preemption. There's a new non-proliferation agenda, including the old approaches of controls on materials, technology, and new approaches such as reserving the right to destroy facilities. We can go in and as the Israelis did in 1981 in their strike on the Osirak reactor near Baghdad, we reserve the right to do exactly the same, which we may do in Iran. Some of you may know Ian Masters and his show Background Briefing. Ian Masters has been talking about an October surprise, that there could be a surprise this October before the November elections. This coming October, before the November elections, we could have a surprise attack on Iran. That could happen. Anyway, toward the end of my paper, I talk about an alternative approach, which is the approach that I've been pushing. Back in 1993, I was the president of the Peace Science Society International, PSSI. Some of you know that organization. And in my presidential address, I talked about a subject which I call global security. The point I made in that paper is that we have to go beyond national security. National security makes no sense anymore. Given the globalization of the world, security defined up to some arbitrarily defined border makes no sense. The only security that makes sense is security for the planet as a whole. That's what I call global security. It's complementary to the UNDP, United Nations Development Program's idea of human security. This is looking at human security, but looking at on a global scale. We have to protect the planet as a whole from threats to its vital interests, which is the way I define global security. We need to create a new global system, comparable to the creation of a new world system after World War II, which we have not done. And we can't have one hegemonic power. That doesn't work. Okay, 5 minutes. So what do we do about dealing with these things? Now, I dealt with the problem of nuclear terrorism in this other paper. If you're interested in that other paper, I'd be happy to email it to you. Send me an email request, and I'll be happy to. And if you don't have my email address, I'll give you my card. But if you're interested in my views on nuclear terrorism, I can send you my paper on that. That's the one that's coming out in the book I've edited. But what do we do about changing U.S. nuclear strategy, nuclear policy? First, we need an educational program to educate the public about what's going on out there. Most people have no idea what's happening out there and how this represents such a discontinuous change from the past. We need to have op-eds, articles, speeches, courses, and everything else dealing with these kinds of issues, inform the public. Political leaders have to be informed about these matters and prodded to work to change the current policy. Even Republican leaders should be prodded to change this current approach, which is extremely dangerous. This is what brings us to the brink. Why we're at the precipice. I have a little difference from many other speakers in this program. I don't believe it's nuclear weapons that create the problem. We've had nuclear weapons for many years now, since 1945. I don't believe it's proliferation that creates the problem. Proliferation has been going on steadily for over many decades. It's these new developments, nuclear terrorism and this new strategy in the United States, Bush's doctrine, that creates the problems. That's my view. A little different than some of the views I've heard expressed here. I mentioned there was an article in the Financial Times, January 6th, a month and a half ago. And let me just read this article because I think it's very important, very interesting article. The White House is in the final stages of updating its national security strategy document, the first formal reassessment of its foreign policy posture since the landmark 2002 paper that set the stage for preemptive strikes against terrorist threats. The revised version is expected to be published next month, that is this very month. Administration officials confirmed it is being drafted by the National Security Council's officials led by Peter Feaver, a former Duke University professor, but has not yet been presented to President George W. Bush for approval. The September 2002 document, that's the one I talked about earlier, which marked the most profound shift in U.S. foreign and security policy since President Harry S. Truman in 1947. It's a very important point. I call it a sea change. Financial Times is saying exactly the same thing. The most profound shift in U.S. foreign and security policy since President Truman in 1947. laid out the strategy of containing the Soviet Union, provoked controversy by claiming the right to strike unilaterally and preemptively against hostile states and terrorist groups seeking to develop weapons of mass destruction. The U.S. invaded Iraq 6 months later. I'm still quoting from this Financial Times article. Okay, 2 minutes. The new document will mark the first time Stephen Hadley, the new National Security Advisor, he was the deputy to Condi Rice, he's the new National Security Advisor when Condi moved over to the State Department, has put his stamp on the administration's security policy. Condoleezza Rice, now Secretary of State, led the 2002 review. NSC officials declined to comment on what changes would likely be made in the existing strategy. However, analysts predicted it would emphasize nation building and the problems of weak states rather than targeting rogue states. It's an improvement. It's a movement in the right direction. We should applaud that. We should support that. I don't know why it didn't get published in the New York Times or the LA Times or other major newspapers. I only saw it in the Financial Times. I checked in the other papers. However, analysts predicted it would emphasize nation building, as I said, rather than targeting rogue states. Mr. Bush mentioned many of the key themes of the 2002 document in speeches ahead of its publication, suggesting that his recent 4 keynote Iraq speeches will set the tone of the current review. And it goes on to say, some neoconservatives, these are the Project American Century folks, expressed concern that the updated document could mark a retreat from the more assertive positions of 2002, such as preemption, the signature strategy of the administration, the current Bush administration, and so forth. So they're concerned about it. Well, I end my paper by saying, okay, one can only hope that this rethinking of our nuclear strategy will take place despite the opposition of the neoconservatives, who are central in this current administration, and will be approved by the President. Who knows where he'll go on this. Otherwise, we may have to wait until the new administration takes office in Washington and reconsiders this policy with the hope that the current policy will not lead to a disaster before that takes place. Now, that was the end of my paper. Let me just add one other thought. One of the remarkable things as I've been sitting here today listening to these talks is there's very little discussion about the United Nations, where the United Nations fits into all this. Now, I happen to be active in one NGO called Economists for Peace and Security, EPS. Alice used to help run that organization years ago when it had a different name, the Economists Ally for Arms Reduction. Anyway, we're an officially accredited NGO accredited to the United Nations. At the United Nations, they have something every October called Disarmament Week, sponsored by the Undersecretary General for Disarmament Affairs of the United Nations. And we regularly make presentations. I go there and give talks. And we hear what the Undersecretary General and his staff are thinking about. It's extremely useful to have this dialogue between the NGOs and the staff of the UN. They bounce their ideas off us, we bounce our ideas off them. I think some good things could come out of that, including dealing with this current Bush doctrine or dealing with nuclear terrorism, for that matter. So I think we should also put more stock and more emphasis on the United Nations as an agency, as a way of dealing with these fundamental threats that are putting us at the nuclear precipice. Thank you.
Question is that regarding the proposal for the roadmap, how likely is it that a government, say the United States, for example, would be willing to divulge some of the classified information that it has, that it would need to address in terms of producing a substantive roadmap for disarmament, and instead of producing fluff that might serve as a diversion over the long haul in terms of organizing?
Well, I think from my point of view, the value of this is primarily as a political process to encourage our government and to engage citizens in the process of demanding such a plan. And there are, as I mentioned, existing plans. There's the draft treaty that already exists over on the table, the Canberra Commission. All of these are rather detailed without requiring any classified data. It's the political process of moving towards systematic reductions and elimination is what we really want. I don't know, Tom did you want to answer this question, Tom? Did you have Oh, okay, sorry.
I'll look at you in the queue.
Anyway, so it seems to me that while ultimately governments need to get into those details, we as citizens, in terms of building the movement, need to push the political issue, and we can use these other examples as very concrete models for how we want our state to move in this direction.
Osama bin Laden, the most recent tape, while threatening more attacks on the U.S., he also proposed a truce. Is this something that we should be at least considering taking up in some way? And that was addressed to Professor Intrillagator and the other panelists.
I would urge all of you to read that statement by Osama bin Laden. It was totally distorted in the news media. It was not accurately reported. Go back to the original. I found it in the LA Times. I looked for the New York Times, it was not there. We often think of the New York Times, the newspaper record. In this case, it was the LA Times that was a newspaper record. It's a remarkable speech, and as I say, it was totally distorted in the news media. He said that he's reserving the right to strike us again, and they have the capability to do that, way beyond what he did on September 11th, if they lose the war in Iraq. But he said, right now we're winning the war in Iraq. Your soldiers are committing suicide in Iraq. This doesn't get reported in the news, in the media. I think he's right about that, as a matter of fact. And he proposed a truce, and was totally shrugged off by the administration. It's a mistake not to talk to your enemy. You go back to Sun Tzu. Someone referred to Sun Tzu before. The classic, The Art of War. Go back and read Sun Tzu. Know thy enemy. It's important to negotiate and deal with your enemy and find out what's on his mind, what's bothering him, what you can do to deal with that, what's bothering him, and so forth. So I think we made a mistake in shrugging that off. I don't say we should do it openly. It should be done quietly, privately, secretly, whatever. But I would not shrug that off. But again, let me urge you all to read that statement. Don't rely on the news reports. They were totally distorted.
The question is that although polling data continuously seems to show that the American public supports the views that we are expressing in terms of arms control and disarmament and nonproliferation, they don't seem to motivated enough by that to even affect their voting for their elected officials. So how do we get them to care? How do we get them to act?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's the fundamental challenge we face. Ultimately, it means that we, as a movement, those who are concerned about nuclear issues, need to organize a political constituency that can put focused pressure on political leaders. Undifferentiated public opinion will not be sufficient to move the elected leaders. And we found other movements that have moved in this direction and been successful. In the 1980s, one of the things we did at the Freeze campaign, at SANE, Council for the Livable World, and all the groups, we formed political action committees, we organized, and we made a difference in a few races in '84 and '86. And that, I think, more than anything else, accounted for the change that began to occur in the House of Representatives. There were some significant votes that we won on the test ban, on funding for missile defense, on the MX missile and other programs in the years '84 to '86, which were not due to the general public opinion, because we had that beginning in '81 and '82 on the freeze. It's when we became sufficiently well organized that we could strike fear into the hearts of the politicians by mobilizing politically at the precinct level. And some of you were out there. We walked door to door. We went precinct by precinct. We made a difference in the electoral process. That's how we were able to make a difference in Washington. And we have to get there again. It's a long, difficult, laborious process, but that's where change can come.
Okay, both Greg and Pamela indicated they wanted to speak, and I was remiss after the last question. The question is posed to all of you, so if you want to address either or both of those questions, please. Greg, you were first.
One thing that hasn't come out here today is that the United States, together with the rest of the world, is facing a series of converging and interlocking crises which are changing the political climate completely. There is a good deal less petroleum and natural gas available than you will find revealed in the financial pages, but if you look among the retired petroleum geologists and the investment bankers, you'll find that we have an imminent, and you can now talk to Senator Domenici, because he's got the religion, as I learned today in a phone call here today. And he's using it to drive nuclear power, of course. The global climate problems are quite severe. The United States economy is quite fragile in conventional terms. The trade deficit is unprecedented and huge and getting worse. The federal annual federal deficit is also very great. Household debt is very high. We have a kind of incipient depression beginning in the lower economic parts of our society. I can tell you that the organizing environment is completely different. We do not have the civil society structures we had in the 1980s. We will not have a social movement like we had in the 1980s in the United States for the foreseeable future. What will happen is that people will be beset and are being beset by very personal problems with security, with their household income, and and I think that if we can make nuclear disarmament part of a coherent platform of human dignity and human security, and find the leaders that we need, and just be confident in our approach that, look, we have to get beyond this. Today in the United States, the average annual take from every household for defense purposes is about $7,600 per year, per household. The total defense outlay of the United States is not what you read in the newspaper, because that doesn't include the Veterans Affairs budget, doesn't include retirement, doesn't include a whole lot of other things. Interest on the money borrowed for the military. It comes to between 850 and 900 billion per year, which is about half of the total world expense on on military affairs. The country can't afford this paradigm of security. And I think that people are ready to hear it.
Thank you, Greg. And I think we'll talk about that tomorrow for sure, because I know that's on several of our minds. Pamela was next.
I just want to make one comment
Yes.
about this. That your question was, how do you make the public care? Fact that they're with us, but they just don't care about it. And I have to say that I think it does have to do with local security. I know I didn't get to talk about this in my talk, but we have a very large Hispanic population in my community who are very interested in the fact that Mexico has been a leader in nuclear disarmament. Nobody has ever told them that. All they hear about is border issues. We have 30,000 children in Ventura County without health insurance, and people know about the budget that's going for the nuclear weapons in this country. This has resonance with people, and they're very concerned about that. When you start talking about that, they care. And PSR did a campaign last year where they factor out and figure out how much each county spends on the nation's nuclear weapons budget, and we present a check to the county supervisors and have a press conference. And for our county, it was $23 million. So these numbers actually have salience with people, and when they hear that, they want to know what they can do about it. And one of the things that's happening in our community is people say, well, we want to go to these meetings in Mexico City or the Open All meetings, and we want to represent ourselves because our local elected officials in Washington have abandoned us. The administration is not representing our interests. The only people who really care about us are the local officials, and so that's what we care about. And if we can have a forum in an international arena like this, we're going to go there. And we will feel confident that we're going to be heard. So this actually, when you find the things that really touch people, they do care, they are aware of it, they just don't know what to do about it, and they feel powerless. So it's really incumbent on us to find what are the things in our communities that will really resonate with people.